Hello, welcome back, Sangha. It's Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. We got a big teaching. I love teaching days. And the Sunday teaching days have worked out pretty good. And Sunday's just a great day for teaching. I think for some of us, you've gotten a lot of your work done and you got a little break and you can sit back and listen to the teachings. We just finished a half an hour loving kindness meditation, which we do every Sunday, and it's been really nice. I personally like to spend the whole day Sunday and do loving kindness meditation. That's my meditation for the full day. It works out really well. Hey, today we're doing some fun stuff. We are continuing our current cycle of teachings on the Buddha's model of the nature of reality. Wow, does that sound like a heavy subject? And we began this series teaching on the two truths. And our last class in the cycle was dependent origination. Today, we move on to the really yummy stuff. We're moving on to the topic of emptiness, which is by far the most requested teaching there is. Everybody wants to know about emptiness. But first, can we take a moment and review what we've learned so far so I can help you put it all together? Remember that this series is focused on how things exist, right? No matter what the subject, they're all related to how phenomena exist. Our first teaching in the series was on the two truths, that there are two ways of perceiving ourselves in our environment: the everyday superficial level of perception of the way things exist, and the deeper, more accurate perception. These, of course, are referred to as conventional truth and ultimate truth. Our second teaching in the series was on dependent origination, which asserts that all phenomena, without exception, exist interdependently. Independence on parts, causes, conditions, imputation by the mind, right? Which refutes the idea of any independent self-existence. We also learned that the most significant interdependence is between the mind and phenomena. This interdependence highlights the existence of our shared conceptual construct, which we talked about in both of our classes and will continue to talk about in this class. Our world of names, labels, and concepts, which allows us to understand our reality by imputing meaning, value, function, and identity, relativity upon our world. And we discussed why these topics are important, that with greater understanding into how our reality exists and functions, we gain mastery over it, right? We're able to work within it. Okay, with that said, I promised I would not have this teaching go on very long. I think our teachings have been a little on the long side. So I want to kind of get to it. So in today's class, we're going to learn about the Buddhist topic of emptiness. This is considered to be one of the most advanced topics and quite possibly technical topics to understand. The reason for this is that the topic, it's complicated because of the different and often divergent presentations by the various Buddhist schools and traditions, meaning depending on who you ask, everybody has a different presentation of emptiness. And emptiness starts off in the Theravada school. And in the Theravada, it's the simplest of presentations. They call it selflessness, which we're going to dig into more in next week's class on our true nature. But the Mahayana school, emptiness is considered to be a Mahayana teaching. And it's just a further and deeper explanation of this topic of selflessness in Theravada Buddhism. But the Mahayana philosophy, there's a few different philosophies within it, and one being the Yogacara philosophy. So for some of you who have already studied emptiness and are thoroughly confused by it, The reason is because the Yogacara philosophy kind of makes a left turn in philosophy. It's a point in the Buddhist teachings where Buddhism embraces this thing called I always forget the name of it. Subjective idealism. Sorry, folks. And subjective idealism is a form of philosophy that the whole world embraced at one point or another. The West embraced it in the Middle Ages, just slightly after the Middle Ages. It's there in Hinduism, it's there in Buddhism. And basically what it is, it's the philosophy, because you can philosophically break down something into the point where you can't prove that anything's there. They assume that that means that nothing can really be there. The philosophy that all phenomena are merely a projection of the mind. Nothing's real, everything is a projection from the mind. This is not the Buddhist view. The Buddha would call this nihilism, right? And any nihilistic view, the Buddha himself would say, defines it as not a Buddhist teaching. So, but Yogacara philosophy is still within Buddhism. It's really strong in the early Nyingma tradition still, and it's prevalent in Eastern Buddhism, in Chan and Zen Buddhism, though they're all starting to move away from it. Even in India, some of the Tibetan Buddhist schools that still have the idea of Yogacara philosophy within it, including Tantra, they're all starting to abandon it. Now that even the most famous Nyingma monastery in the world no longer teaches it, and they teach the presentation which is taught by the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, which was my school and the Dalai Lama's school. And so we're going to dig into this presentation for everybody. So first, let's look at the textbook presentation of emptiness. We always like to start with the textbook. So again, we're going to be looking at the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, which is a brilliant, and if you ask me, just completely correct presentation. Philosophically, it really puts all the other views to rest. And so there's no wonder why everyone's adopting it. In Buddhism, the concept of emptiness asserts that phenomena are empty of independent self-existence. Linguistically, emptiness can be a confusing term, and in many cases it truly is, with many thinking of emptiness as synonymous with physical space, vacuity, that just the emptiness of anything, or nothingness. This is wrong. These are not synonyms of emptiness. Instead, the term emptiness should be seen as a lacking of something, the lack of a characteristic or quality. So you could say Tenzin Tharpa is lacking hatred. I'm empty of hatred. This is kind of the more appropriate way you should think of emptiness. In the monastery, this is referred to as a negating term, right? A negating term is something that cancels out other things, but it doesn't put something in its place. So, however, the easiest way to understand emptiness is through understanding dependent origination. This is because emptiness and dependent origination are actually two sides of the same coin, with emptiness actually defining dependent origination and dependent origination defining emptiness. Meaning, dependent origination, or we call it interdependence, dependent origination and emptiness assert the same thing, but in different ways, in opposite ways. Dependent origination asserts that all things exist interdependently and therefore are empty of independent self-existence. While emptiness asserts that because all things are empty of an independent self-existence, they are naturally interdependent. I'm going to try to make this presentation as clear as possible. I want to repeat that. So dependent origination asserts that all things are interdependent. That's an easy one. And if something's interdependent, clearly it's not dependent or self-existent. And emptiness asserts because all things are empty of self-existence, they are naturally interdependent. One of my favorite authors from a book that we talked about in the Two Truths, the book, The Two Truths Debate, the author is Sonam Tegcher, who is just brilliant. He had a quote that even goes further, and he claims that for the Gelut, emptiness and dependent origination are synonymous with the concept of emptiness being incoherent unless it means dependent origination. And equally, the concept of dependent origination is incoherent unless it means emptiness. So Sonam Tegcher is going further and saying they're not just two sides of the same coin. Emptiness and dependent origination are the same thing. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah? This is the Gelut presentation. This is one of the things that makes it really easy, because I think what you find is that students never have a problem with dependent origination. When I teach a class on interdependence, everybody's just shaking their head. Yeah, they make sense, right? I mean, you can look at your body and say, my body isn't one thing. My body is made up of a lot. If I don't have a brain, this doesn't work, right? Like you could say, what's the most important organ? And hey, there's no answer. If you don't have a heart, you're not functioning. If you don't have a brain, you're not functioning. If you don't have bones, maybe you could function, but you're not pretty. So the idea is, people get interdependence. I mean, you can just philosophically understand that. Well, it took parents to put me here, and it takes every day. It takes oxygen and water and nutrition to keep me going. So dependent origination is always an easy topic, and then it comes to emptiness, and people's jaws just drop. And it's so mystical and strange. And people say, well, I'm starting to get it. But when you understand it in this way, it becomes so easy. So when we say that all phenomena exist interdependently, we're saying that all phenomena are empty of independent self-existence. So right there, you have the meaning of both of those terms in a very easy sentence. That all phenomena exist interdependently, and therefore all phenomena are empty of independent self-existence. Now, what exactly do we mean by independent self-existence? This is understood through analysis. For if we dissect a piece of phenomena, where's my book? Oh, give me a second. I was supposed to have my book here, my trusty book, for example. When we dissect a piece of phenomena, eliminating all parts, causes, and conditions, we find that there's nothing remaining which is distinctly that thing. That no single aspect or essence exists interdependently or independently from other things, right? So no single aspect or essence exists independently from other things. This is referred to as essence-less or selflessness. So let's use an example. I have my example, our book that we used before. So let's do something fun. Let's do a group analysis of this book. And let's philosophically deconstruct this book. Dan, pay attention. I want you to answer some of these questions. Let's philosophically break this apart. What do we got? I can't see everybody on the screen because I have notes up. So feel free to time in. So everybody say something. What was this book made up of? Let's deconstruct this. I'll go first. We have two covers. And not just philosophically, we know it. I can touch these covers, right? What else do we have?
Paper.
We have, Dan got it. We have a couple hundred sheets of paper. What else do we have?
Ink.
We have ink.
We have ink, yes. What else?
Binding.
Can we say we have concepts engraved on the
Yeah, not yet. You're ahead of the crowd here, Alberto. You're exact. You know where I'm going. We have binding, right? Yeah. And then Alberto comes in. We have concepts, right? And what he means by that is we have a mind that imputes it, right? But let's put that off for 1 second. What else? Let's look at causes and conditions first. All right. The mind will save for last. How about causes and condition? Because having all those things doesn't necessarily mean we have book. You know, we could have all those things sitting on a table in separate piles, and that's not book. What are the causes and conditions for book? Come on,
Trees.
Achalamo, I want to hear something from you. Karen?
Trees.
Oh, very nice. Trees, you're right. Without trees, we wouldn't have this. What else?
Machines.
Idea.
Oops, sorry.
Machines, factories. Oh, a very good one, Dan. Ideas. Somebody had to invent the book at some point, didn't they? Book would not exist without that person that says, hey, I got this brilliant idea. You know, all those notes that you have laying around your place, let's sew them together and we'll call it, I'm thinking about calling, my name is Booker, so I'm thinking about calling it the book. What else you got? Remember Thich Nhat Hanh says, can you see the trees in the paper? Can you see the water? Can you see the soil? Can you see the time? It's quite fascinating when you do this, isn't it? Because I guarantee no matter how far we go, we haven't gone far enough. You'll be walking around and you'll think of even deeper ones, right? Okay, so we have this idea of that. Now let's get into the idea of the mind. What's the mind's role in this book? What does the mind offer?
I see a lot of people designing the book. The
This-
typographer to typeset it, the graphic designer to create the cover, and so on.
Oh, very good. Very good. But what does the mind have to do with this? And of course, what we're talking about is our conceptual construct, right? What does the mind do with this book? Because even with all the things you mentioned, if it's sitting on a table, it still isn't book without a mind. What does the mind do for it?
Interprets it.
Interpretation, Dan?
It digests it.
It does. The word we're really looking for is imputation. It imputes. What does the mind impute upon this collection of things? Right now, it's not a book. Remember that. It's just a collection of stuff. What does the mind do to impute book
Label.
onto this?
Label.
You label it as a
Label it.
book.
That's right. We give it a name. We could call that an identity. The mind gives it an identity. Anything else? Function. Without the mind giving it function, we don't know that it's a book that's supposed to be read. We give it function and we know that, oh, that's a book, that's something to learn and get pleasure from. How about value? The mind gives it value, that it's not just toilet paper. Because, you know, it could be, wow, look at this nice collection of toilet paper with pretty pictures all over it, right?
Sears catalog.
Yeah, that's right. So you're starting to get the idea, right? That the mind plays this huge role in it. And if you think about it, it's the mind that brings it to life. You know, like we have all these things and we have this collection, and even if it's assembled and sitting there, it's not book until the mind comes along. So some Buddhists would say emptiness means that nothing exists without the mind. And I think that they take it too far. They exaggerate that thought. Because in one way, philosophically, you could say that the book doesn't exist without a mind to recognize its existence, to impute value, to understand its function, and to be able to pick it up and use it. But I think it's wrong to take it as far in saying that book doesn't exist without the mind. I would say that it's better to just say the mind is the most important factor in the the interdependence of this book, right? Okay, that's the big takeaway, right? Now, from there, if you think about it, now we've dissected it, we've taken all those things apart. Now imagine they're all laying on the table, including the concepts by the brain. But is there any remaining essence out of all of those different things that is truly this book? Can you point to any single one of them and say, this is book? Anybody? Can you point to the paper and say that's book? The ink, the cover, the tree, the water, the function? Is function itself a book? Is the label itself a book? I mean, label is just a conceptual term. It's not a book. Can anybody see the true essence of this book? What is it? Great question, huh? Can anybody see out of all of those things, which aspect is its true nature? Could it be that it's empty of self-existence?
Yes.
Could it be that it's empty of a true nature? Could it be that it's not independent? That the book only exists interdependently upon all of those things? Now, possibly we could do it the other way around, and we could say maybe a couple of those we could take away and still have book. I'm not sure. Like, well, you need the paper, maybe the covers. We could still have book if we didn't have covers. Binding, I think, pretty important. Ink, well, maybe even pictures are made with ink, right? So, yeah. But this is the idea of emptiness. Emptiness is saying that all things exist just like we're talking about this book. That everything, I mean without exception, even conceptual internal phenomena are dependent, interdependent, and empty. So all things lack this essence. All things are empty of the essence. But guess what? We really think everything does. When we see the book, we exaggerate book, and we really think that there's something there that is book, right? And now now you might say on the surface level for phenomena, well, this is kind of dumb. Well, who cares about this book? But when you get into more interesting topics, especially next week when we talk about ourselves, this becomes hugely important. When you realize that we're also talking about you, because when we talk about you yourself are empty of an essence. Guess what we call that essence in the West? We call it a soul, right? In the West, we and a lot of religions of the world, they assert that living things have this essence, true essence, that make them what they are, that they're not completely interdependent, that there is still something there, right? So now what this essence actually is, and I'd like to repeat that this essence is an exaggeration and a false concept. I mean, you might feel that essence is there, but the Buddha's trying to tell you, hey, I know intrinsically it feels real, but guess what? That's not there. What it actually is merely the identity that we put upon it. This interdependent yet empty nature of phenomena is asserted by the Buddha as the true nature in which all phenomena exists, and asserts that at the ultimate, assert these as the ultimate nature of reality. All the things, all phenomena exist this way, and reality itself exists this way. Okay? Boy, now that's a heavy topic, isn't it? I'm hoping that we're approaching it kind of slowly. Now remember, especially people that are listening to Emptiness for the first time, this is one of those subjects that you go to a lot of teachings and slowly it starts to drip in and you get little pieces of it. but don't worry, I'm going to continue, and I think I can clarify it more. And remember, we're still talking about the textbook version of this. So I'm hoping to be able to clarify this for everyone. Let's talk about what emptiness isn't. It's important to remember that emptiness, as used in its Buddhist context, does not pertain to physical space, vacuity, or nothingness. This is a mistake. It does not mean those things. The concept of emptiness also doesn't pertain to whether or not phenomena exist, but instead to how phenomena exist, their true manner of existence. So in a famous quote, the Buddha says, I don't debate with the world. What the world claims is existent, I agree with. What the world says isn't, I agree with. So the topic of emptiness really gets caught up in, and wrongly gets caught up in, how that whether or not phenomena exist. The Buddha had no debate about this. For the Buddha, this was an easy topic. The Buddha never really got into that. He got into understanding how phenomena exist, the manner in which things exist. So please keep that in mind. That's maybe the greatest takeaway to this whole thing. Emptiness is not about whether things exist. I've heard teachers on YouTube that said, the problem with everybody is you think things exist, nothing exists. And any Buddhist that's been educated would just freak and say, oh, that's a nihilistic view. That instantly would make it against the Buddhist teaching, just instantly. But you know what? People are still saying that on the internet. I hear it all the time. And again, this comes from these wrong views that were abandoned ages ago, this idea of subjective idealism. The West abandoned this philosophy. Everybody that had this philosophy abandoned it hundreds of years ago. Buddhism is a little slow in doing so. Now there's two ways of understanding emptiness. There's a conceptual understanding and there's a direct realization of emptiness. A direct realization is experiential, to have the experience. And conceptual understanding is, digging into study. Right now, we're having a conceptual discussion about emptiness. I'm telling you what it is in textbooks, and we're trying to get our minds around the concept of emptiness. That's the hard part. Because if you were just to have an experience of emptiness, you would throw your hands in the air and say, oh my God, Tharpa, I got to tell you about this experience I had. And there wouldn't be anything for me to tell you. I would just hope you put it in the context. But to understand experiences is sometimes harder. So when we get into the experiential, this is a different thing. So the Buddha often talked about these high states like emptiness or nirvana. He would say, they're beyond language and they're beyond concept. You can't really say what they are. And now that sounds quite mystical and sounds very mysterious, unless you look at other things that are on a simpler level that are the same, right? Now, let's take the famous example is chocolate. So you can take a class, say you've never had chocolate before. Well, you can take a class 101 chocolate, all the things about chocolate. And you learn all the ingredients and you learn how it's made, where it comes from. You're looking at pictures of chocolate. You learn every possible thing there is about chocolate. And you have a conceptual understanding of what chocolate is. But that's not putting a piece of chocolate in your mouth. And I can testify to the difference in this. I'm an expert in this field. Putting a piece of chocolate in your mouth is a really different experience, right? And when you put that piece when you have a conceptual understanding of chocolate, your eyes don't grow, right? You don't make those sounds. Oh, what is this? Oh my gosh, what is this? That doesn't happen. When you have the experiential direct experience, or we say direct realization of chocolate, that experience, that's when you really get it. Oh my gosh, that class didn't do it justice. This chocolate is so much better than that book said it was. This is what it's like to have a direct experience, right? And then how do you really put that into words? So now, remember, you've taken the class on chocolate, and now you've tasted chocolate. But can you say more than that class? When you say, what does chocolate taste like? And of course, right away, we say, well, it's sweet, and it's rich, and creamy. But so many other things are the same way. A vanilla pudding is the same. There's so that doesn't do justice to chocolate itself, right? So here's an example I have in the book Tibetan Buddhist Essentials. Can you tell me? I have a whole group of people here, so I'm gonna test your brains. Can anyone here tell me the difference between the taste difference between chocolate ice cream and vanilla ice cream? Easy question, right? Go ahead, tell me. What's the difference, taste difference between chocolate ice cream and vanilla ice cream? We all know the difference, right? We've had them both. No one. You could say whether, huh?
Chocolate,
Yeah.
chocolatey.
You can't use chocolatey as an adjective. You can't use the same word to describe it, right? But
Cocoa
you're
powder?
certainly, huh?
Cocoa powder?
No, it's an ingredient. That's not a taste. Now, let's do the same with another. Can anyone here tell me the difference between green and blue? That sounds easy, right? We've grown up with these colors. Come on. What's the difference
Only
between? Yeah?
by comparison, only by comparison, like a leaf, like the sea. We can't, it's qualia. We can't say it.
Well
There's no
said.
language.
That's right. Direct experiences are often beyond language. So when a guru tells you, you ask them a question and they put you off and they say, oh, my child, I'm afraid emptiness is beyond concept and language. And they try to make you feel very small. That's really what they're saying. It's just very few direct experiences like that are really quantifiable through language and concept. This isn't mystical. This is just the nature. Our language is somewhat limited to expressing ourselves. Though they say English has the most adjectives of any of the languages. I don't know if it's true or not, but so we
Not
attempt
true.
to. So that's important to understand when we're talking about these qualities like emptiness. But with that said, I shall attempt to do it anyways. And the Buddha did. In the beginning, when the Buddha was first asked about nirvana, which we've talked about here before, and they say, what's nirvana? The Buddha said it's indescribable beyond language and concept, and he would describe nirvana as a negation, just like we learned emptiness is a negating term. The Buddha didn't say what nirvana was, he said what it wasn't. Nirvana is the absence of suffering. Meaning, he said, nirvana, he didn't try to say what it was. He said, nirvana is the absence of samsara, right? And in that same way, that's what emptiness is. The experience and everything, it's such a rich thing, it's hard to really say what it is. Okay. So now let's dig into the juicy stuff, right? This is the stuff that I'm hoping you're not going to hear other places, that this is going to be very unique in our Sangha. Many wonder what the actual experience of emptiness would look like. And this is debated like crazy in the monasteries. People are all talking about it. Again, because it's a direct experience, it's so hard to put into language. The closest people get is using poetry. Poetry seems to be able to weave in and out of concepts and describe things in ways that are hard to describe them in a normal way. When directly experiencing emptiness or interdependence, the two domains of our objective world and our conceptual construct come into proper balance, and the distinction of the two is perceived clearly. Okay, this is one of the main aspects of the experience of emptiness. So, and of course, this gets into our discussion on the two truths, right? We have a normal way of looking at the world, and we have this complex way, right? So, with our conventional view, we perceive these two things of the objective world and our conceptual construct as merged together. We don't see a difference. When we pick a book, we cannot perceive the difference between the physical matter, the objective reality of this paper, this binding, this thing on the table, and all the stuff my mind does to impute meaning on it. To us, it's just all one thing. It's a very surface, superficial view of what book is, right? But again, through analysis, we can look at it and say, oh, it's a lot more than that collection of things on the table. There's so much more to it, right? This is the real idea of the two truths. That conventional truth just sees all of it mixed together. There's book. Hey, give me that book. I want a book. And then through analysis, we start to realize the way phenomena exist in the world is way more complicated and amazing than we commonly see it as. That, wow, that there's so much going on, so much projection and imputation by my own mind in this process of me perceiving book, right? So a direct experience of emptiness is the deepest experience of objective distance. We've talked about objective distance before, and in our books, Mindfulness Basics and Meditation Basics. And we talk about objective distance in meditation is this experience of kind of a backing away from the world, a distance from the world. Time seems to slow. We go into great detail about it. Time seems to slow. The importance and immediacy of the world starts to dissipate. That's the feeling of objective distance. Emptiness is the deepest experience of that. So we can experience objective distance at the beginning of awakening, but then emptiness is a far, far greater experience of it. I should probably say properly that objective distance is an aspect of the experience of emptiness itself. Okay, and in this way we transcend any grasping at notions of a fixed identity, right? We lose the idea that this book is a single independent thing. And we realize that this book is interdependent. We realize that this book is in a state of constant change. And we realize that the function and things of this book depend on the consciousness that's imputing it. So this grasping at the notion of fixed identity is the very ignorance we talk about here. We talk about in Buddhism that keeps us trapped in samsara, right? Samsara, the cause of samsara, the second noble truth is ignorance, right? In the Gillig school. And that is the ignorance, just isn't a blind ignorance. And again, we describe ignorance as not knowing, knowing the wrong thing, or not wanting to know. But it's a very special, a very significant ignorance. It's an ignorance that sees the world as independently self-existent. That's what keeps us trapped in samsara. It's an exaggeration of reality. And guess what? When we lose that, that's nirvana, losing that ignorance, not seeing everything that way. For when we begin to understand emptiness, we slowly start to uncover the true ethereal nature of ourselves and our environment. For some of you, the word ethereal is kind of like a cloud, not as substantial, right? A cloud is real, no doubt about it, but a cloud isn't the same thing as a rock. A cloud shifts, changes. It's not as substantial, but it is, both are real. It's important to know that. So understanding reality, we start to uncover the ethereal nature of ourselves and our environment. We begin to understand that we exist in a much more subtle and wondrous way. we discover that even our daily problems, obstacles, and hardships are equally empty and not nearly as immediate and as substantial as we assume. Sometimes when people first hear about emptiness, they seem to be a little bummed out, especially emptiness when related to the way we exist, no self, because it kind of feels like we're stripping the world of its substantial identity, and we really are. But there's a fear in us of the ethereal, right? One of the reasons they say we're trapped in samsara is we have a fear of not being substantial ourselves. We want to know that we're substantial and our lives are substantial, and our jobs and our houses and our life and our family and our happiness and our security and all of the things in our lives are substantial and real and quite tangible. But the Buddha says, sorry, everybody, it's quite the opposite. These things in our lives are much more ethereal. And what he meant by that is all the things in our lives aren't static elements. They're dynamic processes. Everything in our life is in a constant state of change. Everything in our life is dependent and interdependent on other things. Everything is shifting. When we talked about our mind and all the roles it has in imputing the world around us, imagine how that changes according to our views. Our imputation of our reality changes. So this is what the Buddha is saying. But what I tell the people when they feel a little bummed out by it, once you get comfortable with it, you start to realize the Buddha is telling us that we exist in such a cooler way than we know. We exist in the most miraculous, wondrous way. And look through some of our morning prayers and you'll see what I mean. We talk about it in all of our morning prayers. And I promised I wouldn't talk everybody's ear off, so I'd like to get to the conclusion of our teaching. So all of the topics of this series pertains to pointing out the interdependent nature of phenomena, right? All of it. And that all things are related and intertwined. And also remember that the topics in the series also pertain to how things exist, not if they exist. This is not part of our philosophy. That's a different one. There's nothing wrong with thinking about that. There's nothing wrong with reading your Facebook posts about the guys that say all of life is an illusion and we're all actually in a computer somewhere sitting on Alberto's desk. We're all a video game. Feel free to have fun with that. In this series of topics, this isn't it. We're talking about how phenomena exist, which is based on the fact that we're first accepting that things exist. And between you and me, unless somebody has some real evidence, I'm just going to take it for granted that I'm existent. You can do what you want to, but unless somebody has evidence to the contrary, it seems like I'm pretty existent. Okay, so all of them are pointed at that. But emptiness goes further by revealing and clarifying the existence of our shared conceptual construct of names, labels, concepts, and identity. To me, this is the most important aspect in emptiness. I was almost going to start this whole thing talking about this, and I think now's a good time. Because in the experience, so I had an experience of emptiness in meditation. And what my experience was, is that while I was meditating, the conceptual construct of my reality fell away during meditation. Now, it didn't disappear because I do believe that's impossible. It was diminished. We can have a very, very diminished feeling of conceptual construct. People talk about feeling egoless or selfless, or all things are one and they didn't exist independently. Now, that's a strong feeling that's often talked about in meditation, but just because you feel it and experience doesn't mean it's true. And what the reality is, you were still the person that experienced it. You know, you can't get away from the fact that whether you felt like you had no singular identity, you still experienced it for yourself. When you came out of it, you talked about your experience of emptiness or selflessness. You came out of the meditation. No matter how much we try, we cannot move away from this idea of self-identity, right? It's always there, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's healthy. That's how our consciousness works. There's nothing wrong with that. But that is the basis of our conceptual construct. So we don't really ever lose it, but we can diminish it, and more importantly, we can bring it into a proper balance. Because like the two truths say, conventionally we just see everything as solid objects. That has a lot of problems involved. That's why we deal with a lot of our problems. So to see things accurately, we bring things into a proper balance where we perceive both the conventional aspect of phenomena and we still understand the ultimate nature of how it truly exists. So emptiness, in a sense, you could say emptiness shows the dichotomy between objective reality and a conceptual mental overlay. To me, that's the most important aspect of emptiness. Emptiness itself says that the objective world, objective reality, is empty of our conceptual construct. It's saying the two exist interdependently. I wouldn't say separately, because they are in perfect harmony. And we're trying to philosophically separate them to understand them. But ultimately, with the two truths are in harmony and intertwined. We're not trying to separate them. We're trying to see the beauty in how they're intertwined, the interconnectedness of them all. But emptiness philosophically demonstrates the difference. And when you see the difference of those two, and you understand that reality, we have an objective reality and we have a subjective reality. Objective reality is the material world of stuff, rocks, water. Those things don't change. That's the objective world. Our subjective reality is our conceptual construct that lays upon it, and it says, it's all of our labels, all of our thoughts and concepts and functions of how all that stuff is. It names all the things within that objective reality. Let's call this rock, let's call this water, let's call this book. Let's give book a function. Let's tell everybody what book does. This conceptual construct is the proper interface for working with our objective reality. Without this, we could not exist or deal with our objective reality. Without the conceptual construct, we couldn't make sense of our objective reality. We wouldn't know right from wrong. We wouldn't know good from bad. We wouldn't know poison from food. We wouldn't know danger from safety, night from day. All the conceptuality we use every day to live, that's our conceptual construct. So it's a beneficial interface. It's our friend. We love our conceptual construct. So understanding the way reality is, the true nature of reality is that there's two dimensions. We have according to Buddhism, I'm not trying to say that I know this firsthand. Buddhism states that there's an objective reality and a subjective conceptual reality that is placed on top. Emptiness shows us the difference of the two, right? And more importantly, shows us that we actually create our reality. Now, we don't create the objective reality. That's there, right? We create the conceptual reality, the subjective reality. There's no way to know the objective reality without conceptual construct. Our senses don't work without the conceptual construct. We need an eye to see, not an eye, but a me. You know, the senses need a subjective identity in order to process. You know, everything we do is reliant on the conceptual construct. Especially like and dislike. You know, when you're a caveman, you hate tigers and you love berries. That's very beneficial. So So in a sense, we don't create the objective reality, but we create the subjective reality. And guess what? For most of us, our reality, our personal reality, I would say is about 80 to 90% subjective reality. Yes, there's an objective world out there, but other than just physical matter, everything related to that is mental. Even our senses, to touch a rock, those feelings are electrical impulses running up through your nerves to your brain. Your brain says, that's rough, that feels like a rock. I mean, I would say maybe even 95% of our reality is mental. And what do we say when we say mental? We mean the conceptual construct. So knowing this is the first step to kind of, hey, getting it and learning how to work with this. This is a complex thing, right? And it's through understanding how our reality functions that we gain mastery over it. At the end of all these big topics, I always think to myself, there's somebody in the audience that says, what does this matter? Why the hell do I need to know that a book is made up of many things and my mind imputes? It's interesting, but how does that benefit my life tomorrow at work? And the answer is that understanding our reality is how we gain mastery over it, right? That's what it comes to. And that's how we gain freedom from our ignorance, right? Because our ignorance of the way things work is what keeps us prisoned in samsara. And our mastery over our ignorance is what leads us to nirvana. And in closing, I would love to add one last beautiful quote. There's so much more that I wanted to talk about, but literally I just don't have time. So please, we're going to meditate on this throughout the week. Anybody have any questions, please let me know. There was another aspect that made this teaching tough. I was trying to imagine my audience. So when you get to a topic like this, you realize that there's people in the audience that haven't even heard of the term emptiness. And then I have friends that say, Tharpa, you got to teach us about emptiness. And I know they're waiting for this incredible, deep, firsthand account of what emptiness is. And they're expecting me to deliver. Somehow I have to come up with something in between. When we're teaching on the Four Noble Truths, this is an easier thing to do. But when we come to topics like emptiness, because there's topics that we haven't talked about, like the emptiness of emptiness. And so I hope that I did justice to the whole audience, that I made it simple enough for new people to at least scratch their heads at. And then some of the people that have studied this in the past, there's some new information that made it a little bit more understandable. So with that said, I'd like to leave you with this last quote by Lama Yeshe, one of my all-time favorites. And I at one point I thought, oh, you don't have to teach on emptiness. You only have to read this quote to everybody and give everybody the rest of the night off. All you're going to do is butcher it and spend half the night yammering. Here's the quote. So, through perceiving, I'm sorry, I messed up right away. Quote, though we perceive a world of concrete and distinct objects, these objects are empty of the identity imputed on them by their conceptual labels. Though we perceive a world of concrete and distinct objects, which are real, by the way, no doubt about that, these objects are empty of the identity imputed on them by their conceptual labels, right? So we're saying that, that rock, it's there, I experience it, it's real, but that rock is empty of all the conceptual things that I'm imputing upon it, right? Now, maybe rock's a bad example because a rock's just stupid, it's just sitting there. But how about looking at your child? Let's say your daughter. Your daughter, physically real, she's existent, she's right there. But that child is empty of all this conceptual baggage that you're laying upon people. You're creating an image of your child. You perceive an image. In a sense, what we're talking about is interpreting, right? When you understand emptiness, you start to understand the role of interpretation. You start to understand that we're always interpreting the world around us. We're always interpreting our sense input, whether it's visual or anything else. We're interpreting. Well, that looks like my friend, but they get closer and you realize you're wrong. We're always interpreting, right? And so what happens is when you start to realize this interpretation and how much your mind is creating a reality, not just experiencing or perceiving a reality, you start to let go. When you understand emptiness, you start to let go, right? So for me, like I was saying, when I was experiencing emptiness and the conceptuality of everything, the conceptual construct fell away, all of a sudden I saw the room around me objectively as it really was. My value attached to all the possessions in the room disappeared. They were no longer my things. I remember looking at my dog on the floor, sleeping on the floor, and all the idea of identity of my dog and even his name or anything like that were just gone. And it was just I remember not even be able to call it dog, because even the concept of naming it, it was just like beast, just being on the ground. And it was a wonderful sensation. It was a very freeing sensation. And I remember after my meditation, I was still in this state of mind, and I bundled up. It was a snowy blizzard outside. I put on all these clothes and I just wanted to walk around the neighborhood and experience it. And again, I saw everything in its objective nature. Now, the conceptual construct was still there, or I couldn't perceive it. So we're talking about an incredible reduction of it. And so it was so clear to me, the role of my conceptual construct. This is something I never learned in class. Buddhism didn't teach me this. This is something that I experienced and then later learned about it to understand it. And for the first time, I saw the actual role of our conceptual construct. And what happens is, once that happens, you're freed from all this grasping at immediacy. You know, we see our lives, and because our lives are so complicated, and because we exaggerate them, they're so substantial, it's so real. It means everything is really substantial. When you have a problem, it's a real problem. It's substantial. Oh my God, what am I going to do? When you start to lessen your grasp on all of this, and you realize even problems just come and go. So many things, like the old saying, most of the problems in my life are just thoughts. You start to realize this. And you start to just let go of everything. And it's an incredible level of peace that comes with it, right? Lastly, I'd like to say, I had a teacher who was explaining to me his experience of emptiness. And he said, it's a lot like walking into a mirror, like stepping into a mirror, like Alice in Wonderland or something. And I was so intrigued by it. And he says, you know, when you step into a mirror, everything looks the same. But you realize at the same time, nothing has any true nature of itself. That everything in the mirror landscape is made of the same thing. And it's all interdependent, right? Everything in the mirror is dependent on the reflection of what's real outside. He says, that's what it was like for me, that the world started to feel like a mirrored world. And I could see that nothing had any real essence. Now, he said, this doesn't take away from the fact that things are important. This doesn't take away. We're not saying that people don't exist. We're not saying that Paul doesn't exist and need my help. We're just saying that he exists in this incredible, wondrous, and a bit mysterious way, doesn't he? Wow. He's real and he really exists, but he exists in this way. But it also tells us that a lot of the stuff that we grasp at just isn't as immediate and as important as we make it out to be. The Dalai Lama always says, samsara is nothing more than our own exaggeration of reality, exaggerating the importance, the substantiality, the identity of it all. So emptiness is showing us that. Emptiness is showing the lie of the exaggeration we project upon the world. And I think I'm done. With that said, I shall bow. How was my presentation on emptiness? You know, I had requests a long time ago to teach on it. And the reason I put it off was because I actually haven't finished my own presentation of this yet. These topics in this series are going to be in a book for the last book in our study curriculum, which Miss Nalini will edit, but I haven't actually written it yet. I have lots of ideas and notes. So this series in teachings has been really useful because each week I have to prepare my views, because I could just narrate what everybody else says about emptiness, which I think is really unhelpful. All of the presentations I ever got on emptiness, I always thought were just really unhelpful. You know, it's just this conceptual textbook version that they never really seem to tell you how it applies to your life, why it's good. So anyways, so this has been a great opportunity for that. And I hope the book comes out even better, but this is my first step in it. With that said, I bet there's a few questions out there. And if not, you weren't paying attention. You were all sleeping. I'm going to call on Paul first, because Paul has been asking for a teaching on emptiness for for a year.
That was very good. Very, very good. Better than the books I've read.
Thank you, Paul.
Question-wise, I'm still absorbing it. So I haven't got one as yet. I might have by Wednesday.
You got it. Miss Nalini? I'm sorry, Tenzin Achalamo. Does everyone know what that name means? I gave her this lovely name. Acha means sister, and Lamo means goddess or deity, or diva, right? We'd say in India, we'd say diva in Hindi. My sister, the diva, holder of the Buddhist teachings. Did you have a comment, Miss Achalamo?
No, Paul said it all. We need time to assimilate, and then probably on Wednesday.
I'm a little bit careful about something else when I teach emptiness, and that's actually sharing my experience of emptiness. Here's something really fascinating. So the Mahayana tradition has been going on for ages and ages, thousands of years. You got all these schools all over the place. Emptiness is the main topic. Everybody's studying it. Everybody's working towards it. But guess what? Nobody's experiencing it. No one. You don't meet anybody that's experiencing it. You know, and of course everybody says, well, of course the Dalai Lama is, but even they don't talk about it. And as I travel and I get into conversations with people, as soon as you say, well, my experience was like this, everybody stares at you, because they're all so convinced that it's unattainable. They believe that no one, even a senior monk who's been practicing this their whole life, couldn't possibly have an experience of it. I thought that was really sad. And one of the reasons why I moved in a different direction, because why practice teachings of things that nobody can ever achieve? And you know, they say, well, in a couple lifetimes you'll be able to achieve it. Well, how many lifetimes have we been saying that? So that's something curious. But I thought better to be brave and just blurt it out that I've had an experience of it. A taste of emptiness, I would say. Not a strong direct realization, but a taste. And it's guided my studies and my views ever since. Tenzin Dorje, indestructible spirit, holder of the teachings.
Yes, thanks for the name once again. So I hope I will be able to ask this clearly. My question is, why as human beings are we more inclined to fall into this, how to say, not the delusional, I cannot find the correct word, but
That's
the
right.
misconceptional side, but we cannot, let's say, due to our nature, land in such an easy way, heavily on how things. Why is it scary? Because I saw a dream the other night. I was trying to look somewhere deeper, and I was scared. Maybe is this some human soul hurdle, or what do you think?
You're exactly right. This is one of the big problems with humans. So we do it in so many ways. The first way we do it is we just don't accept reality. We go about our day with an idea of the way life should be. People should be kind to each other. People shouldn't steal. People should help the poor. People should do. We all have these ideas. And guess what? We're all miserable because it's not. And every time something happens, we say, this isn't right. People shouldn't be this way. And I'm not saying we're wrong, but I'm saying that we don't accept the world as it is. We live in a fantasy, a delusion, or projection. And we have an idea of the way things will be, and we're always upset that it doesn't agree to that. In fact, in our book on happiness, we have the 5 steps of acceptance, and that practice works exactly at this. And so that naturally goes into other things and other exaggerations, right? So let alone do we want to project a world that's better than it is, then we want to create a world that's even better than that. We want to create a magical world in which people can fly around, and we believe stories. There's a guy in the cave on the hill that could do these magical things. And somehow we're all delighted in it, right? Really, we want to know that magic exists. We want to know, a magical world is better than our regular world. So we start off with our crummy everyday world. We project an okay world, and then we go even further and we project fantastic worlds. Now, there's another type of projection, and we do it out of fear. So now this goes way back in Buddhism to early stories of the first Buddha, Samantabhadra. He gives a story. It's only a story, everybody. It's not real. That the people were enlightened, and then their mindfulness started to fall away, at which point they started to develop fear. And the fear of existence. I think I'm telling the story wrong. But out of that fear of their true nature and the way they exist, this is where samsara is born. This is when they start to exaggerate. So in a better way of saying it is that because we fear the actual way we exist in this more ethereal way, that we are not substantial things, but we're all dynamic processes in a constant state of change. At every moment, we're different. This kind of terrifies us. We want stability. We want, no, I'm not that thing. I'm not a cloud. No, I'm a mountain. I'm real. Here I am. We want all the things in our life to be substantial. We want our love to be substantial, right? From our mate. We don't want them to kind of say, well, yeah, I kind of love you. No. I want you to promise that you love me more than anyone else. We want to, well, we call it reifying. We reify the world. Does everybody remember our affirmation of suffering? Through reifying. So reifying is to make something more concrete. By reifying my identity, I reify my vulnerability. Through reifying my vulnerability, I reify my problems. Through reifying my problems, I reify my suffering. Conversely, by realizing the ethereal nature, the ethereal and wondrous nature of my identity, I realize the ethereal nature of my vulnerability. By realizing the ethereal nature of my vulnerability, I realize the ethereal nature of my problems. Through realizing the ethereal nature of my problems, I realize the ethereal nature of my suffering. I should have just said that first, huh? That prayer just says it all. Samsara starts with reifying my identity. And it leads to, if I'm substantial, guess what? So are all my problems. Well, when you realize your identity isn't as substantial as you think, well, guess what? Neither are the things that are going on around you, the problems. And we call that freedom, right? So yeah, that's a big problem that people do. We do it in so many ways. We exaggerate, we project, You know, we always are projecting better scenarios. Some of us are always projecting worse scenarios. We probably know cynical people, right? No matter what good happens, they have a way of interpreting it negative. She calls you on the phone, she likes you. You say, oh, yeah, she's probably doing it just because she feels sorry for me. We have a problem accepting reality. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Oh, it was a very fulfilling one. Thank you.
But that's what we have to tackle. And guess what? When we understand emptiness and we start to see how we exaggerate, you have to understand the problem, right? You have to know the sickness and how the sickness comes about and why you have the sickness. You got to know that before you can treat it. And what's the medicine? The Dharma. The medicine is starting to understand this. The medicine is understanding your true nature, embracing it, becoming comfortable with it. Lovely. And this is going to be even clearer with next week's conversation. I don't even notice, but almost each step in this series, we're talking about the same thing, just through a different lens. We talked about the two truths. Well, guess what? The ultimate truth, it's all about emptiness. That's what it's about. It's about dependent origination and emptiness. And then we get in dependent origination. And what's that all about? It's all about emptiness. That everything's interdependent. Everything is empty of independence. And then we get into this, and that it's still the same subject. And next week, when we get into the true nature of ourselves, it kind of brings it all together. And it also makes it really personal. Like when, we can talk about why a book exists in this way and how we're imputing a book, but who cares so much about the book? It's interesting. But when we turn the subject to you, to Beth, to Alberto, why you do the things you do, why you exist the way you do, all of a sudden he goes, oh, now we're talking. Now this is important. Now this is something that I need to know about. Why Achalama is the way she is. Why does she exist in that way? That dynamic processes. Lovely. Well, it was a lovely teaching, lovely to share it with you. And now I got to get busy on next week's class. I'm taking tomorrow off. We're still in meditation, but I'm going to take the morning off and go for a boat ride, I think. I earned it this week. No more questions? Oh, again, I must have just taught it excellently. Yeah, it couldn't be that I intimidate everyone. They don't want to ask questions. Okay, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.